Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take your sources, articles, investigations, research, and give you the essential knowledge you need fast. Today, we're wading into a really thorny area of local governance. We're looking at the privatization of essential services. Specifically, we're asking what happens when the job of local enforcement, things like fines for littering or dog fouling, is handed over to a private company, a company that's motivated first and foremost by profit.
Mm.
So the mission for this deep dive is to analyze a major investigation into one of these firms, Kingdom Services Group. They had contracts all across the UK, hired to keep streets clean. But the investigation suggests the way they did it. Well, it really compromised the whole idea of public service.
And that's the fascinating thing, isn't it? The immediate conflict of interest that pops up when you put law enforcement inside a profit structure. What the sources show is this systemic tension. When the measure of success for an officer isn't public interest anymore, but just maximizing revenue.
The whole purpose gets warped.
Exactly. The question for you as a citizen becomes, am I being policed for safety? Or am I just a walking revenue source? The investigation found that, yeah, this firm was generating a lot of revenue for councils. But critics say that efficiency came at an unsustainable ethical cost.
Right.
We're talking about a real erosion of trust, at the street level.
That's the crux of it, really. I mean, outsourcing is common, but when it involves discretionary power, the authority to slap someone with a fine, to decide guilt on the spot, then how people get paid really, really matters. So let's unpack that. Section 1, how did this business model, Kingdom's model, allegedly create such a deep conflict of interest?
It all boils down to the internal financial incentives. So the firm is contracted by the local authorities, but inside that structure, the core allegation was that the company just prioritized volume over everything else.
KPI.
Right? Key performance indicators. But they weren't set by public accountability. They were about maximizing the number of fixed penalty notices, or FPNs.
Yeah.
And the most damning finding, I think, was the allegation that the company incentivized its own staff.
Through bonus.
Through bonuses,
Yeah.
yeah. Officers could actually earn bonuses based directly on the number of tickets they issued.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just a small perk. The sources suggest that officers who are, high-performing could seriously boost their income by hitting these volume targets.
That immediately changes the job, doesn't it? You're no longer a community warden. You're a sales quota hunter.
Mm.
If your own paycheck, your ability to pay your bills, is tied to how many people you fine, then any motivation for discretion, for giving a warning, or for judging that something was an accident, it just evaporates.
Precisely. And if you look at the contracts, councils often keep the fine revenue, but the firm gets paid for deployment and processing costs.
Mhm.
But if the firm gets a high volume of tickets, they look super effective.
Which guarantees contract renewal.
And growth. The bonus system is the engine that ensures that volume. So you get this financial decoupling. The firm is incentivized to find infractions, and the council gets clean streets and revenue, but they avoid all the messy PR.
It's a system where finding failure is financially rewarded over preventing it.
Yeah.
And the citizen, the person paying that fine, is the fuel for the whole engine. When enforcement becomes just a numbers game, the spirit of the law, which is meant to build respect and compliance,
It's completely undermined.
you shift from a system of deterrence to one of, financial extraction.
And that shift is really visible in the tactics they reportedly used. If the metrics demand high volume, then, something has to give.
Yeah.
And that something is ethical policing.
Which brings us right to Section 2. If the financial pressure is dictating the outcome, what were these officers actually doing on the streets to meet those quotas? This is where the investigation found some really controversial stuff.
The accounts from whistleblowers, from former employees, they were very specific and deeply troubling. They claimed they were basically instructed to use deceptive methods designed to maximize the chance of catching someone, not preventing the offense in the first place.
Oh, so?
Well, we're talking about officers being told to actively use hidden positions.
What, like hiding?
Yes, literally staking out public areas by hiding behind cars or bushes. Their role wasn't to be a visible deterrent. It was to be a silent collector, just waiting for a small slip-up.
That changes the whole dynamic. A uniformed officer standing by a bin in a park, that's a deterrent. It encourages people to do the right thing.
Right.
An officer hiding in the bushes waiting for someone to drop a cigarette butt. That's surveillance for profit.
And that deception, it allegedly extended to their appearance. Officers would apparently conceal the company logos on their uniforms.
You're kidding.
Sometimes cover them with taper jackets.
Yeah.
In a real public service role, visibility, clear identification, that's paramount. It's about transparency. By hiding who they were, they completely eliminated the deterrent factor and maximized the element of surprise they needed to issue a citation.
So the goal shifts from proactive neighborhood improvement to just reactive revenue generation, which brings us to the fines themselves, this idea of spurious ticketing that the investigation uncovered. What sort of offenses are we actually talking about here?
The word spurious, I think, really speaks to the disconnect between the severity of the offense and the zeal of the enforcement. In the UK, fixed penalties for littering can be, what, 80 pounds to 150 pounds? These aren't trivial sums, not for small accidents.
No, not at all.
And the concrete examples that were cited included people being ticketed for things as minor as accidentally dropping a tiny scrap of paper
Yeah.
or a small piece of food.
Which is a world away from, say, fly tipping a mattress.
A world away. The officers were reportedly targeting the most marginal infractions because they were the easiest to find and process quickly.
And I suppose the easiest to get people to just pay rather than fight. But this idea that officers were actively hunting for these small mistakes is just, it's very concerning.
Absolutely. The investigation alleged that officers would often follow people until a minor infraction occurred.
Following them.
Following them. They weren't responding to a public safety issue. They were engaged in targeted surveillance of individuals until they could, generate a bill.
Yeah.
This aggressive pursuit of tiny infractions is the direct, logical outcome of a volume-based bonus structure. If you need 10 tickets a day, you can't wait for 10 people to dump a fridge. You have to manufacture the opportunity from these minor accidental slips.
That detail, the hunting and following people until they drop a receipt, it raises such serious questions about the ethical mandate of this firm. It's enforcement that feels predatory.
It is predatory.
Which leads us to Section 3, and I think the most disturbing findings of all. The investigation revealed allegations that this system was actively targeting the most vulnerable people in the community. Who were they allegedly focused on, and what does that tell us about the profit model?
The sources alleged that officers specifically targeted elderly citizens. And this wasn't random profiling. It was reportedly a calculated business strategy.
A strategy.
Yes. Officers apparently saw older residents as ideal targets for two key reasons. First, they're often very law-abiding, so they're less likely to cause a conflict during the interaction. But more crucially, for a company's cash flow, they were seen as more likely to just pay the fine immediately.
Without putting up a fight.
Exactly, without mounting a complex legal challenge or going through a long appeals process.
So the system just prioritized the path of least resistance for collecting revenue. It leverages vulnerability to get paid quickly and efficiently. That's moving beyond aggressive into something really reprehensible.
It's more than aggressive. It weaponizes the social contract. And that's why the broader critique in these reports suggested that this kind of privatization profits from poverty. The system thrives by leveraging these minor, often accidental mistakes by people who can least afford a £100 fine and who certainly can't afford the time or the cost to fight it in court, even if it's completely baseless.
That breakdown of the social contract is so important. The enforcement system becomes this efficient financial extraction machine. It's focused on maximizing return on investment, not on fostering a cleaner, safer community.
And when you have these aggressive, profit-driven tactics, the inevitable outcome is a fundamental erosion of public trust in local government itself.
Right.
Residents start seeing the authority figures, even if they're private contractors, not as community wardens, but as, antagonistic collectors.
So you create this climate of suspicion and resentment toward all local services, even the necessary ones. You start questioning every decision the council makes if you think the motivation is just cash, not compliance.
Exactly. The civic partnership just collapses.
So given all of this, the serious breakdown of public trust, what was the official reaction from the councils that hired these firms? Did they all react the same way?
There was a really distinct split in the response, which I think speaks to the complexities of local government budgeting. Initially, some councils staunchly defended using these firms. They argued that, despite the complaints, contracting companies like Kingdom was the most cost-effective way to keep their streets clean.
The bottom line.
The bottom line, for them, visible results and budgetary relief at first outweigh the ethical concerns being raised. They often argued that without the private firm, enforcement would just stop entirely.
Because they couldn't afford an in-house team.
Couldn't afford it, or at least not one with the same aggressive efficiency. They were making a very difficult trade-off. Efficient cleanliness for, diminished goodwill.
That argument makes a certain kind of sense in budget-tight times, but it seems to ignore the long-term damage. So what happened when the sheer volume of complaints and bad press just became too much?
That's where the backlash really hit. The negative publicity from the investigation, all the public complaints about aggressive and unethical tactics,
Yeah.
it had real
Well,
consequences.
some councils pulled out.
Yes. Multiple local authorities, facing huge reputational damage and political pressure, ultimately terminated their contracts with Kingdom Services Group. They recognized that the strain on public trust, the political cost, was just too high a price to pay. Even if it meant the streets might be a bit less clean or they had to find a new way to do things, the ethical balance sheet, in the end, forced them to recalculate.
That termination sends a powerful message, doesn't it? That this kind of aggressive, profit-driven enforcement, especially when it targets vulnerable people with spurious fines, it just isn't sustainable in a democracy. The whole incentive structure was a failure of governance. So we've really uncovered a stark tension today. The necessary job of keeping public spaces clean versus the massive ethical cost when you delegate that power to a profit-driven model. The investigation into Kingdom Services Group paints a pretty crucial picture of what happens when the financial incentive to ticket just overrides the public service mandate. It breaks that social contract between the state and the citizen.
And I think this deep dive really forces every citizen, every local council, to question the entire architecture of compliance. If your enforcement officers are financially incentivized through bonuses and quotas to just maximize volume regardless of intent, can that system ever achieve genuine civic compliance?
Or does it just breed resentment?
It breeds a toxic combination of resentment, suspicion, and a perception that local government is just operating a kind of predatory tax system. The acceptable trade-off between efficiency and ethical fairness is something you have to weigh every time you see a ticket being issued in your own community. If the system is designed to reward cashing you out, rather than encouraging you to behave responsibly, well, what impact does that have on your long-term willingness to participate in a healthy civic society?